Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of This Old Cemetery. Today we visit Salado Cemetery, which is located on the northeast side of San Antonio, Texas. Now, as I promised in my last episode, for all you San Antonio natives out there, you may recognize some of the last names of the people that are buried here based on the roads you drive on or the roads you drive by every day on the northeast side of town. And if you're not from San Antonio, stay tuned because there's still a lot of interesting information about the people that are buried here. So let's get started. So right when you walk into the cemetery on your right, you see the last name Schulmeyer. And believe it or not, Harry Schulmeyer is the son of Henry and Betty Schulmeyer, which are buried at the forgotten Schulmeyer Cemetery. Here, Harry is buried with his wife Edlin, and here is a picture of the happy couple. Now, next to the Schulmeyers is Edlin's sister, Norma Keith. Now, Norma had a husband named Richard Charles Schaefer that died in 1944, and he is also buried at the Schulmeyer Cemetery. Now, behind Norma and Edlin is their parents, Alma and Willie Tone. And I just have to say that I'm glad that Harry and Edlin Schulmeyer aren't buried at the forgotten Schulmeyer Cemetery. Now, these two obelisk-shaped monuments are by far the best detailed monuments in this cemetery. And during this video, you're going to notice a lot of German last names and German writings on these tombstones here. That's because most of the people that are buried here are immigrants from Germany or have descendants from Germany. So if you're a native of San Antonio, you're going to recognize the last names here based on the roads you drive on or drive by. Moving toward the back of the cemetery is where all the Eisenhowers are buried at. Now, if you're a native of San Antonio, please don't take out your anger or frustration on the Eisenhowers. It's not their fault for the horrible traffic on IH-35 and Eisenhower Road at 5 p.m. They just own some farmland there. But anyways, this is the grave of Paul and Anna Gembler Eisenhower. Both are originally from Germany, and they married on April 20th, 1833. Believe it or not, they had 12 kids together, and 3 of their kids are buried here. And here is one of the 3 graves of their children here. Buried in front of Paul and Anna Eisenhower is their son, Philip Eisenhower. He was born on May 22nd, 1844, here in San Antonio, Texas. And here is his wife, Sylvia Eisenhower. Here I included a picture of Philip and Sylvia Eisenhower. Now, buried in front of Philip and Sylvia Eisenhower are Sylvia's parents, Jacob and Elizabeth Schmitter. So Philip and Sylvia had 7 kids together, and one of their kids is buried at this cemetery. Her name is Rosa Eisenhower Steinbring. She married Walter Steinbring, and you could see a photo of them here on their wedding day. Buried right behind them is Walter's parents. Here we have Louis and Christina Lucia Eisenhower. Louis is the son of Paul and Anna Gembler Eisenhower, and here is their child, Alois Eisenhower. The third and last child to be buried here of Paul and Anna Eisenhower is Friedrich Eisenhower. Now, I must add that Friedrich was actually born in Germany, and here is a picture of him here. To his left is his first wife, Marie Eisenhower. Friedrich and Marie got married on February 12, 1870, and together they had 5 kids. And after Mary died in 1882, Friedrich married Bertha on December 15, 1883. Now, here is a grave of Edwin Eisenhower, and I'm not too sure if that's Friedrich's son or I don't know. So, I know Marie and Friedrich had a child by the name of Albert Eisenhower, and his tombstone was missing, but it was actually placed over here right next to Paul and Anna Eisenhower. Albert Eisenhower was born on May 6, 1878, and died on May 18, 1892. Moving on from the Eisenhowers, Here you see some graves of the Heimer family. Now, Heimer Road is located by, I believe, Bitters and 281 in the northeast side of town. Now, from what I can find, these people have roads named after them mainly because they owned farmland around the area where the roads are currently today. And here's another name we all recognize, Rittiman. Here we have Charles and Mary Rittiman. And as you can see on this death record here, Charles was a farmer and had his own piece of land. Right next to them is their daughter, Adela Rittiman Zamzow. Here we also have a death certificate, and you can see her cause of death. Now, Charles had a sister named Ida Rittiman. She married Robert Butler and had 5 kids together, as you can see here. Now, 3 of her kids are buried here. So here is one of the 3, Robert Frank Butler. And next to him is his sister, Ida Emma Butler Sheffield. And the last child of Ida Butler is Elsie Butler Norgard and her husband, Darwin B. Norgard. Now, what was really interesting is this grave of a pet here. Now, I'm not too sure whose pet that belonged to. And to my knowledge, not having any relation to Charles or Ida Rittiman, here we have Alton and Elma Rittiman. And here is their son, Alan W. Rittiman, who is buried adjacent to them. So as we look at the other graves of the people that have roads named after them, I just want to say how interesting it is that this cemetery is so close-knit. And to imagine that once upon a time, all these people owned farmland and were probably neighbors with one another. Here we have the grave of Roy Schneider. His wife here, Bernice, I'm assuming is still living. And right behind Roy is his parents. Now this grave here was pretty interesting. Notice this sidewalk that leads you right to the tombstone. And when I saw this, I imagined a woman in black going right to the tombstone and weeping over the departed loved one. What's really interesting about this cemetery is these square perimeters throughout the cemetery. And these square perimeters are for specific family members only. Like here we have the Creets family, and only the Creets are buried there. Up next we have the Fisher family, and only members of the Fisher family are allowed to be buried there. You know, this cemetery has organization, and it's very uniformed. That's something that I've never really seen before. So on May 9th, 2018, TPR put out a news article asking who owns the Salado Cemetery. And after a bunch of research, they couldn't find an answer whatsoever. To this day, as far as I know, there are no owners of this cemetery. And thanks to the members of the Jones N4 CrossFit, they helped out in cleaning this cemetery, which was pretty neglected between the years of 2010 and 2018, and I'm assuming that they still keep up with the cemetery to this day. And it was discovered that the reason it became neglected in 2010 was because this gentleman here, Calvin Harlos, was the one that was keeping up with the cemetery. And buried right next to him is his brother, Elgin Harlos. Kelvin and Elgin's parents are buried right behind them, as you could see here. Now, buried right next to Edgar is his parents. Here we are walking towards the grave of Heinrich and Emma Thies. Now, it is said, according to Find a Grave, that Heinrich had a gunshot wound to the chest and it was a possible suicide, and that he was suffering from cancer of the face. And here are two of their 8 children, Henry and Otto Thies. Here is Heinrich and Emma's daughter-in-law, Lily Thies. She married their son, Walter Thies, in 1924, and before she died, she had a son in 1925. However, this is her husband's child from his second marriage, and here is her child right here, Walter Thies, who is buried on the opposite side of the cemetery. Now, this grave here is sprouting full of life, as you can see this tree growing from 6 feet under. Now, losing any child or a loved one at a young age is very, very difficult. But what happened to this kid's family years later is even more tragic. On October 10th, 1960, policemen and firefighters went to the Scorn farmstead, and what they saw was horrific. The entire Scorn farmstead was burnt to the ground, and where the barn once stood was a pool of blood, where they found the remains of animals that had gunshot wounds to the head. And when they went to where the Scorn homestead once stood, they found the charred remains of Bruno, Wanda, and Clyde Scorn, and each of them had a gunshot wound to the head. Now, this was ruled as a murder-suicide, where Bruno shot Wanda and Clyde, murdered all his livestock, set the farm on fire, and then shot himself. But based on his charred remains, there wasn't concrete evidence that he did this, so it'll always be a mystery. And last but not least are the graves of Carl and Maria Schaefer. And right next to them is their son, Hermann Schaefer, who was tragically killed by a train, and it was ruled as a possible suicide, as you can see here. This concludes our tour of this old cemetery. Join me next time we visit Wetmore Cemetery, which is also located on the northeast side of San Antonio. Now, this cemetery is also a historical cemetery, so we'll focus more on the older graves there and give a backstory on who's buried there. Be sure to leave your comments in the comment section below, and be sure to like and subscribe. And if you have an Instagram, follow me on there to keep up with what videos I may come up with. Thanks for watching.